We have the enviable position of being the first panel right after lunch. I actually don't think that's a bad thing because we're actually talking about something that's pretty important and pretty interesting from my perspective. My name is Helen Burt. I am the Chief Customer Officer at Utilligent. We are a management consulting firm that really focuses on utilities. But I spent all of my career up until about the last 2 years on the other side of the table at PG&E mostly. So I have a panel of leaders here to talk about data. And I am so excited about this because when I started to look at their backgrounds, and I can introduce them because I can remember everything. These people have such pedigrees. I'm going to have to read it to you. So I'm going to ask your apologies in the beginning because this panel is rock star. And I'm going to start with my far left, your right. This is Amelia Batters. Now Amelia is you're like me, spent all of your career in the utility sector itself. Yep. And you've actually been with CPS Energy, which is, as we all know, at Z-Prime is a very, very leading utility on the newest ways to do things, the newest thoughts around smart cities and everything else. But let me tell you a little bit about Amelia. She's Director of Enterprise Advanced Analytics. She used to be Director of Commercial Analytics and Pricing, and I looked all through your resume, and what I learned about that, because we're going to be talking about data, you actually led and drove a lot of the places that data was most important in the utility industry, which is in the wholesale trading piece of it. And so while we think about our industry being so, forgive me, data deficit and really not understanding how to use data, there are certain sectors within our industry that have really used it and used it well for a long time, and one of those is wholesale and retail trading. So I'm so excited to hear what your perspective is and where you are now. Next to Amelia, and I got to get this right because, again, by the way, these two guys overlapped each other in the Obama administration, so you guys can ask them about that as well.
We didn't work for President Obama, though, just to be...
It was a good story. That was a better story.
It was.
You got to go with it.
It was. I'm sorry.
It sounded better.
I'm hyping the panel. So to my immediate left is Dr. Kristin Brown, and she's the Principal Technology Innovation at Exelon. Now, most of us know that Exelon is made up of, I don't know, about 7 companies now, right?
6 utilities.
6 utilities plus Washington, D.C. It's one of the more complex utilities in the United States. It's also one of the largest. And the thing that I loved about what you're doing there now is you're actually a principal in technology innovation. And so that's your official title. But her background is beyond. She was in the Obama administration. She was in the U.S. Department of Energy's Advanced Research Projects Agency on energy, where she identified new opportunities to reduce the long-term and high-risk technological barriers in the development of transformative energy technologies, and that is a mouthful. What that means is, I think you were doing a lot of the creative thinking that we all enjoyed back during that period of time around energy, from my perspective at any rate. So we're delighted to have you too. I should mention that I called Kristin Doctor. She received her PhD in chemistry from Northwestern University. So, obviously folks up here, they're a little bit remedial, shall we say. And last but certainly not least, Josh. Now, Josh, you were also in the Obama administration. You also were with the same agency. You actually led that agency, correct?
No,
Again,
I did not.
You're just like pulling the air out of this panel for me.
Sorry. No, we did technology commercialization.
Good.
I did.
Good. All right. So, Josh, your actual role now, you are with Con Ed.
Yep.
So I don't want to get these mixed up between ComEd and Con Ed. You're actually with ComEd, and I thought this was a very cool title. He's actually manager for the Utility of the Future group. So you have a whole organization that's really developed to think about the future.
Yep.
And you were also, I said you were in the Department of Energy, the ARPA group. You were also an entrepreneur, correct?
Yeah. It's starting to be like a requirement to be in our group. You have to be a failed entrepreneur. So here I am.
All right. Well, good. Well, I am super excited. I think our whole conversation this morning is about from kind of where we are in the utility sector to what's possible. And so you can see we've got lots of different perspectives as we come into this, and all of these folks are sitting within the utilities, and they're with some of the most innovative utilities in our industry. So I'm going to first start the question by just asking each of them sort of where they are and where their utility is along the journey. So Amelia, you want to start?
Sure. CPS Energy is in a great place, I think, on our data journey. 2018, we finished fully deploying our AMI meters. We are certainly not as large from a meter perspective as some of these utilities, but gas and electric meters combined, we're over 1 million meters all in the San Antonio area. And so taking, 1 million customers from once a month meter read to every 15-minute, not just consumption, but also operational data, events and signals, certainly significantly, I don't want to increase the amount of data on that side of our business. And so, learning how to and thinking through how to use that data, shifting, I also would say in our data journey, realizing that AMI data became the data that required you to break down silos of data in the industry. Because you cannot, we had these conversations 3 years ago, who owns the AMI data? Well, the AMI data is needed by the customer engagement group, it's needed by the distribution operations group, it's needed by the energy market center, it's needed by the trading group. I mean, there's just, it breaks those silos down. So I think we're at that place where we see the potential. We've got the basic infrastructure in place with our analytics enablement platform to deal with data at scale. There are bigger data sets in the world than AMI data, but for utilities, that's a big data set. And we're starting to reap the first analytics and advanced value from that data. So that's, we're started in our journey, but we're certainly on the leading end.
That's good. What about you?
So, as Helen mentioned, I work across all of the Exelon utilities. So Exelon, I think most are familiar about, big generation company, largest nuclear owner in the country. Also have a retail arm called Constellation, and then we have the 6 utilities that we own. So Pepco Holdings, headquartered in DC, owns 3 utilities, Pepco, Delmarva, and Atlantic City Electric. Then we're in Philadelphia with PECO, Baltimore with Baltimore Gas and Electric, and then in Chicago with ComEd. Actually used to be in ComEd's Utility of the Future group, so a lot of slight similarities. Definitely people thought I was with Con Ed, and then Win was kind of taken out of their sales when people heard ComEd. But kind of regardless, now what I do is technology innovation across the fleet of our businesses. I'd say our data journey, there's the individual utility data journey, but then there's the enterprise Exelon Utilities data journey. And at this point, all but one of our utilities has AMI infrastructure. 3 of the 4 are Itron SSN, the last is on census. And in those instances, the investment was really predicated on cost savings and O&M savings for the business. We're now at a point of similar to what we just discussed about what else can you do with that information, and can you justify doing things with that information in a way that maintains customer privacy and security of the system. So I think there's 2 ways that I break down our data work. It's what are we doing internally and how are we thinking externally. From an internal standpoint, the biggest, I think, criteria and priority for us is cleaning data, merging data, and creating really big data lakes so we can really leverage analytics. That is a non-trivial investment and a non-trivial process. We're also, I think, taking an interesting, at least on the customer side, microservices approach to developing out new analytics-based systems that recognize that not every vendor can meet all of our needs. So how do we set up this platform to then enable other types of vendors and partners to leverage our data and create solutions? From an external perspective, which is where the conversation really gets interesting, we're still working through a lot of that. I think fundamentally, we're trying to become a platform business, which means in some ways interacting more with external parties, kind of lowering our shields around data, but figuring out ways to maintain privacy and security while giving third parties with reasonable products and solutions access to information to run analytics, to develop products and services, and really be an active participant in the third-party innovation landscape. But that's a conversation that we're currently having with our internal executives. It's not an easy one. It's a pretty big business transformation.
Wow. Well, how about that, Josh?
Great. So Josh Gould, Con Edison. We are the electric, gas, and steam utility for Greater New York City. Also have some territory in our suburbs. From a data standpoint, we are in the midst of our largest capital investment project in our company's history, which is an AMI rollout, and we're about a quarter of the way through. I would sort of characterize our journey as a little bit sort of crawl, stand maybe, then walk a little, and thinking about running a bit in the future. So we really got to get the basics right. We got to get the nuts and bolts right. And I think that's maybe not as exciting to talk about, but very, very necessary. So things like, can your meters communicate effectively in dense urban environments? It is a little different for us in New York City, hence why we're rolling out our meters. And we started the rollout of our meters in some of the less dense parts of our territory, like Staten Island and in the suburbs. So we're about a quarter of the way through that, and built these sort of IT infrastructure to take that data, or in the midst of building a sort of data lake. Analytics and optimization on top of that is frankly less of a concern right now. It's definitely an objective and a goal. It's frankly less of a concern right now than us doing the basics right. But we do have a path, and we do have aspiration and strategy around that, which actually we didn't always have in the past. So baby steps, and much more to come as we finish our AMI rollout.
Well, it's interesting because you're kind of sort of all three in different places and doing different things. I think Kristin, you're the one that is really on the leading edge of looking to externals. That's a really new area for use of this data. You've got a mature rollout of your AMI.
Yes.
So you're in a good place from that perspective, and then you're sort of in the beginning. But in a way, that's good because maybe you can learn from
everyone else's mistakes.
Exactly. So in thinking about that, and thinking about the journey the utility has to do, and frankly, as an industry, we tend to move very slowly. What do you guys think? And I'll start with Kristin on this one. What do you guys think are some of the biggest challenges that we have to deal with?
So I can see her cheat sheet of questions, and I was really hoping you wouldn't start with me. That's fair. There are about 30 that we could probably just all throw out.
Yeah.
I think to a large extent, I'd say the speed of technology is a challenge, the regulatory environment and the cost is a challenge, and then just breaking down the silos is a challenge. And in terms, and I probably am not going to remember what I just said, so maybe someone can remind me what the three were. But in thinking about breaking down silos, the point about AMI meter data really being transformative across the business is really critical. And I think what we're still seeing today is if I am doing a project with my energy efficiency team and my demand response team, I need data, I need information from my grid team, and those two don't always share across the fleet.
That's right.
And there are legal constructs in some places that make it challenging for that information to be shared. And on that note too, from the regulatory standpoint, what we're really needing to do are make pretty broad transformations in how this data is used, and certainly we've promised to our consumers that we'll protect that data, we'll use it to their best interests, and we're continuing to do that. However, I think there's education that still needs to happen with our PUCs to understand why what it is that we're doing is in their best interest, why that investment is necessary, and why these silos should be broken down. And then back to the O&M standpoint, it's so funny, just anecdotally, I'm trying to do what I was hoping would be like a $300,000 project. And for those of you like in utility land, like $300,000 can be like pulling teeth trying to get
If
that
it's the
money.
wrong kind of money.
If it's the wrong kind of money. Whereas I'm Shell, I'm like, oh, I have a small $1 billion fund. And you're like, that's nice. But I need data from AMI, I need data from, I need VVO, I need voltage, I need frequency, I need customer information. And what I hear from my teams is, okay, we can get you that, but understand that I need to manually go through and correct where meter data is misaligned with customer identification numbers, where there are holes in data, where there are anomalies in data, and that is a non-trivial investment just to get that data for a project. And it's certainly a non-trivial investment to fix, so I don't have to keep asking for that every time I need it. And I think that investment is something that people, especially externally, don't quite capture. A lot of what we're pulling from are very old legacy systems, and that interoperability isn't assured from day one from implementation. And that happens with AMI. If a feature doesn't work, it's installed and we kind of release it because it's not a critical one. But as it becomes critical, and there's a huge cost burden to do that.
So what I hear you saying is that really one of the biggest challenges is because data has been so siloed and because some of the SOL systems are so old, the concept of data engineering is not trivial. And in fact,
Correct.
it's a big investment.
Yeah.
And as you think about, and I ask this for all of you, because I think this is an area that is critically important probably to everyone. As you start to try to make those investments, if I'm the end user, I don't even know what all data I want yet, because part of this is about the creativity of learning. Oh, you've given me data from 15 different systems. Oh, if I only had this now. And then that requires the whole, rinse and repeat, as my grandmother would say, process. And I think this is something that we can't trivialize, this notion of data engineering, and that's a huge challenge. What about you, Josh?
I think just taking a step back from that, even before we talk about interoperability challenges and trying to ensure that we get value out of this data, the biggest thing for me is like it's kind of like isn't the first step of a 12-step program? It's like first you have to realize you have a problem. I think there was this notion in the earlier days that, okay, well, we're going to a metering vendor. That metering vendor will provide some basic product or service, and we need to write a check and manage that that project, and then we're good. It's like, no. And I think there's an increasing realization, which is really important. In fact, our CEO talks about data and information as our fourth commodity, gas, electricity, steam, sort of like our fourth commodity. And so if you really believe that we build an entire people infrastructure, we build an entire business model around effectively and reliably and safely delivering those commodities, you need to have the same approach to data. And what that means is, and again, it's one of these notions that you can just contract with someone else and they're going to fix it. No, I mean, that's where you need, first of all, you need, again, the sense of ownership, this realization that it's going to be the internal utility capabilities are going to be critical to sort of delivering on the value and delivering on that kind of fourth commodity as we refer to it at Con Ed. But that also means in delivering the capability that yes, you partner with vendors, yes, you work with vendors, but I think there's an increasing realization that you have to have those skills and capabilities, and you have to have a strategy in-house. You have to have a commitment in-house, and that sounds, again, very basic, but I think we have seen what happens when you don't have that, and the outcome is really bad. So trying to develop that kind of internal capability and treating it as a real kind of fourth commodity that's critical to the effective delivery of our services, just like the electrons themselves are. So.
Wow. What do you think of the challenges?
So I love what both of you mentioned. I think that I have a couple to add, but I think I want to key off what you just said about that fourth commodity and treating it. One of the things that you need to do with data is think about reusability. Building integrations that work once between two systems is inefficient because, like you said, as soon as you get these two pieces of data connected together, and whether it's your data scientists or whether it's your operational experts and your engineers, they start looking at that and they say, oh man, if I just had this third piece, there's this whole other set of questions. So you need to think about that reusability, even in your integrations. And it is a challenge because some of this takes, it all takes some level of investment from the company. And so, recognizing that you mentioned, I wanted to say on the AMI and what you said. So we did what I think every AMI deployment did. You had a business case for why you did AMI. You made sure all of the functions were necessary and all of the data was good that supported that business case, and everything else could wait. Deal with that later. And you just need to be cautious about what you choose to deal with later because it's a whole lot more expensive to go back and fix than it is to get it right the first time.
So really, there's a danger of expediency because you just sort of think it's really kind of dangerous because you're like, well, I'm gonna do this one thing and I kind of hold it together with bubble gum and tape and then like it'll be fine. But then you start seeing that you're doing that time and time again, and it's you see that a lot. We have to solve this one particular use case and we'll just sort of do whatever is necessary to solve that one particular use case. And then you stand back and the whole thing looks like, tape and bubble gum, and that's not good. And that's what causes us to sort of stand back and say, hey, we need a strategy, we need a capability, we need a sort of, as buzzword is, an integrated approach, right? Even across commodities, to be able to do this. So no, that's a great point.
So I'll real quick hit 3 things that I also think are really important. One is learning to be storytellers versus just fact sharers.
That's right. Yeah.
And in this space where there's so much new sources of data and new way to connect it, it's sometimes very challenging with those of us with a very fact-based way of delivery to tell the story so that our management and others can get excited, our regulators can get excited about what can be delivered through data. So that's one. Also, and you mentioned it, privacy, protection of data, and value creation are competing with each other, and how to find the right balances there, especially when our consumers expect more from us because we're the utility. I believe they expect more from us. They're more afraid of how we're going to use the data than they are afraid of how Google or Amazon or anyone else is using the gobs of data they freely say yes to every time they push the button to get their app. And then the other is, I think of changing the mindset with those silos of data stewards versus data owners. When I think of data owners, I think of mine. It's my data. Why do you need it, right? Why do you need that column? Which columns do you need? I'll give you just those 3 pieces. Versus data stewards have a responsibility to protect, they have a responsibility to secure, but they also have a responsibility to ensure appropriate access and value generation off their data. So kind of shifting that mindset, I think is another big challenge we have to overcome.
Let me just key off of that for a minute and go a little off script here. Because that made me really think about something. And I think this is an interesting problem when you talk about breaking down silos and breaking down barriers and who owns the data, who traditionally owned the data. And it depends on which data. We talked about AMI because AMI, most business cases were about more efficient meter reading to monthly bill or to present hourly usage on the web. I mean, those are the generally, those are the items that are used in a business case. And yet the data has so much more power than that. And it's so much, just that piece of data has so much more. So I wonder, and I'd ask each of you in your own utilities how this is evolving, because that data is very useful in the operating side of a utility to really efficiently operate the grid. And you can imagine, I mean, many of you coming from wholesale trading, and if you think about, I know you've worked on peer-to-peer trading relationships, the data itself is going to be incredibly important to the future of how the grid works. And so how do you see that battle occurring inside your utilities? And do you think there's a central data something, or do you think it just becomes owned predominantly and taken care of predominantly in its area of usage?
So
No right or wrong, I'm just curious.
It's interesting. I don't think it's realistic that all of the data sets will be housed in a single ginormous data lake.
Yeah. It's
Now,
very expensive.
That's up for debate, and so I certainly don't say that's the only way. So how you access data for your use cases varies, but I do think the utilities, just like other companies, are going to have to move to a more centralized view of data. And it's no longer the business entity, it's no longer the distribution business, or in this case, like in our business, it's no longer the customer engagement business that owns the AMI interval reads because they're the ones that own the meter shop. You can't think that way anymore. And I'm fortunate that, you know, at CPS Energy, one of our basic principles is one company mindset, and you know, how do we bridge those barriers and think about value to the customer, really making that shift for customer experience. But it isn't an easy shift, because everyone wants to own, everyone feels an appropriate burden to protect the data.
Yeah, of course.
And the privacy associated with it, and so they're afraid of
Yeah.
releasing it and it getting used in a way that may not be appropriate. And
Yeah.
so that, to me, is what speaks to, at a minimum, a centralized data stewardship, data governance
Yeah.
establishment,
Yeah.
establishing that for your organization. But we haven't figured out what that's going to look like at CPS yet either. We're just moving along in that direction.
Anybody else have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's funny because with data, there's just so many thoughts that kind of go through, I'm sure, all of our heads just simultaneously. One that I think a couple that I want to touch on. The first, just pretty quickly, I think while data can be viewed as this fourth commodity, I think we also have to get ourselves out of the mindset that data, we're going to sell data for millions and millions or billions of
agree with you.
dollars
Yeah,
to
yeah,
offset
yeah.
the reduction in
It's
capital.
Not a gold mine.
It's not a gold mine, right? The data is the new oil. Is not what our sector is going to experience.
That's right.
And I find that the utility has this tension, and coming from the government, this is why I like the regulated industry, is that there's really a responsibility of the utility to really be, to help solve what would have been clear market failures, right? And where the third-party for-profit entities won't go. But at the same time, the utility is a for-profit entity. And so while it can't be as, I think, free and flexible as the government in some administrations tries to be, it does have this responsibility to be building solutions and services and working with third parties to help provide this information so those solutions and services can reach a broad market. The last point that I'll make, because I think this is important around when we start talking about data silos, is, you know, we have a big business intelligence data analytics initiative that really is creating a central data lake. And I think where you see these things really coming to a head, where you have to bridge customer with operations data, is around DER integration.
That's right.
And if your business is about trying to connect to the customer, either directly or through a third party like an Energy Hub or like Nest or someone like Sunrun, and you're trying to create stability on the system, you have to have those data streams integrated so you can understand the devices on the system, so you can develop their load profiles, and so you can do your voltage and frequency and energy control within the distribution utility and then up to the ISO if that's the market. And so you have to combine that for DER integration, which is just, it's just another instance of DER is pushing the business in an area that we haven't expected before.
And it has to be real time. It can't be last month.
And I think there's a question between, does real time mean real time back to a central system, or does real time mean distribution automation on the edge that manages it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really, so I just want to make a general point here. If you think about resilient systems in nature, like if I think about, you know, biology and sort of real, like, broad resilient systems, they tend to be decentralized. There's often some form of coordination, but they tend to be decentralized. And so I think, but I think that's a really, where you have, it's not that you can't have sort of a centralized data lake, but there is a tendency a little bit that I think in a utility where we move from unidirectional power flows to bidirectional power flows, and who knows, maybe we'll have multidirectional power flows. That
And peer-to-peer.
and peer-to-peer,
transactions.
you know, I think we need to move away from the mindset we need to control everything, but yet there does need to be some coordination, which is different than just control. There needs to be coordination. But if I think about how do you drive resiliency, well, it's really what I would say is decentralized coordinated control, which is a lot of words, but I think that makes for a more resilient system. And I agree, DER and bidirectional power flow is really pushing us to move that way. So.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions here, so I'm just going to ask one more question, then I'll open it up to see if anybody in the audience has a couple of questions. And from your perspective, when we talk about this topic within our industry, this topic of data and how we get to what's possible with data, what do you think are the biggest myths? And Josh, this is yours to start with.
Okay. I think that, well, I touched on the one of the myths up front, which is, well, we're a utility and we operate sort of infrastructure, therefore we're not data people, and so we can just sort of outsource this. Find a vendor, they give us some buzzwords and we'll like write a check and we're good, right? We solve that. And I think we've realized there needs to be a really strong capability in-house. I think the other thing that we don't talk enough about is it's sort of a given that we know what we want to achieve with data, with specific use cases. And we found in so many instances, before going out and looking for partners, before going out to the market, before buying or evaluating solutions, spend the time up front to know what you want. We've made some, I think we have done well where we have done that really rigorously and effectively, like what's the use case, what's our intended outcome, all that sort of stuff. And so I think the myth that you can just go find something on the market and that everything you need to do is a partnership's critical, but you need to have some capabilities and some goals and some strategy in-house. Otherwise, you're just going to be chasing the next shiny thing and buzzword. So.
Just spending money.
So I have two. One is I already said, which is that this myth that data is going to generate revenues in order to save the utility business model, and that the only way for us to create and capture value is to start charging astronomical amounts for data. I personally don't believe that's our place as a regulated entity. We're a steward, we're not an owner. In some jurisdictions, that's written into law.
Yeah.
I think another big myth, which just totally lost my mind, and it was really awesome, I promise.
We can come back.
But is that the entire third-party market is capable of disintermediating the utility. I think, so I do a lot of blockchain work in my business, somehow became like the Exelon blockchain person, for better or for worse. And you see a lot of third-party companies saying, if we had this information, we would disintermediate, we'll get it, and that will be the end of the utility. I do think there is a critical role for people with energy systems and operations experience in our business. And I think despite the power that some of these markets bring, a lot of my job is reminding our executives that operating the electric system is a challenging and manual process. And just because we see an data engineer come out of Amazon and start a new energy company, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the end of our enterprise. And so there's this delicate balance about being real about what data can do, but then also ensuring that we are reacting and preparing for what it can enable. And so finding that is a pretty, as I said, delicate discussion.
Well, I'm just going to add something to that, because you actually hit on something that I feel really passionately about, and our company feels really passionately about, and that is the utility sector is really an important glue to a sustainability in the planet. I think the way the utility sector operates, and I think keeping some portion of that operational and thriving really matters for the future of sustainability, and how it won't look the same as it does in 2019, in 2030. But I don't think you throw the whole thing out. So I agree with you on that. I think there is a lot of fear because change is happening so rapidly with third parties coming in. But I also think the utility sector is really important in the service that it provides.
And I want to just clarify, because I caught myself thinking like, oh my God, did I just say no one but a utility can do this? Because I never want to be that utility person that's like, don't even think that you can touch our job.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
But I think where like I've struggled a little bit is, and I'll use the blockchain companies is why I brought this up, is you have a bunch of people that started companies who try and sell to utilities who have never worked in a utility, and the market complexity is enough, I think, to create a product that doesn't have a good fit for the business. And so that's where some of these dialogues come from around, yes, that's a great analytics tool, but get time, understand the business first, and really trying to get a sense for, is a vendor someone who gets it and who has a plug and play, or is it just someone who's creating a data solution that doesn't fit into a complex market? Tends to be a bit challenging, and at least my executive team doesn't always have that clarity.
And it's just feeding off of that. It's more than just the fitting into the market. I mean, there's real physics to the delivery of reliable energy. I mean, there's real physical laws. And so, you know, so much of the innovations in renewable, which are fabulous, and we're all kind of holding our breath for economically viable storage through battery, which still isn't here in any kind of scale or significant time frame, you know, where you could store wind in April in Texas and use it in August, right? That's so there are real physics, and that's where I think people miss. There's in that, and that's the role the utility has the privilege of serving for our consumers, right? That is a necessary role, and maybe somebody will displace us someday, but I don't see it in the near-term horizon, as the entity that ensures power is balanced regardless of where the kilowatt hours, whether they're coming off your roof next door or my nuclear power plant in South Texas. You know, it has to be there when you flip the light switch on. It can't wait for 2 weeks for the truck to come.
Last myth, that data is all about efficiency and optimization. Because to that point, right, if you have a responsibility around reliability and resiliency, and you're running an optimization on like blue sky day criteria, well, what about the 1 in 30,000 event that happens, and you're just cutting off the tail in order to optimize against this bell curve? Well, you're gonna have some serious issues if you're dealing with critical infrastructure, and that's actually, and that's where you see a lot of people outside our industry kind of not getting it. Sure, efficiency and optimization, maybe even in most cases that's what it's about. When you're talking about critical infrastructure, that can be really dangerous. So.
Well, according to my borrowed watch here, we have, by the way, Apple Watches are no good for panels like this. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up for questions. This is a great panel, and I'm sure you guys have some questions. Okay.
I actually have two. So can you guys say, because my name's David, I'm with New Braunfels Utilities, and we're at the forefront of building out a big data platform, data lake and everything. Do you guys have data lakes already installed, or are you guys still working on building them out? That's my first question.
We're building.
So we have what we call our analytics enablement platform, which is the foundation for our data lake, but we are still having the discussions on what do you house there versus what do you bring in when you need it and leave it housed somewhere else or not house it.
My second question actually goes towards being a data steward. I've been to some other conferences and the talk about, as a utility now, providing information to the public. Have any of your guys' entities looked at actually posting information on your website or something where anybody can go and access it and download information? If so, what kind of information do you do?
So I would say everyone's probably gonna have a very limited approach to that. For us, and again, all of our utilities are different right now in how they do it. Some of our utilities are Green Button Connect enabled, which is a little bit different. ComEd has an anonymous data set with a fairly marginal cost associated with it, basically just to cover the O&M. Can discuss later on how valuable the anonymization protocols are for that. But the biggest one right now that we're seeing nationally is on the hosting capacity side. That's, and all of our utilities, again, deal with it differently and have different methodologies that we're working to converge. But some of them will show you the literal feeder diagram on the website. Pico has a really fantastic tool in doing that. ComEd's is a little bit at a higher aggregation level. But I think that's the information right now that comes closest to system operation data that the utilities are starting to provide.
So data is a huge regulatory push for REV in New York State. Reforming the energy vision, it's a big regulatory push in New York State. We have published data around hosting capacity for most of our feeders. We've had to anonymize some of that for security concerns, all with the goal of better interconnecting third-party resources. So that was really a mandate. And then we also have you can actually find it online, it's public, distributed system implementation plan that contains some of the feeder maps and all that. And basically it's all about tell us more about your network and the price signals associated with that network so that I know where to put my third-party resources for DER developers. So that's for us, that's a regulatory push, and a lot of that is public.
So we're probably, the closest thing we've had is at CPS Energy, I think, is participating in a datathon in our area where we took anonymized interval meter reads in a certain region of our area, I think about 1,000 customers, anonymize that information, and the point was to stir innovation. What could people do? What kind of products could be developed if people could see, if these innovators could see how energy usage changes throughout the day. But it is a very tricky space, both from a security standpoint and from we're still figuring out what value the data will. I agree it's not going to make us millions of dollars, but how do we leverage the data for value for our customers versus what we
All
can
right, one more quick question. He was first.
Real quick question. So I've used Green Button. It's not what I would consider a phone point of view. I think everybody knows that.
Yeah.
One of the issues, though, with it is not really the utility's fault. It's the fact that you're clutching an API on top of an aging system. And so I wonder if you guys have any comments around how IT costs are not rate-based and how that affects your ability to deliver data. Because it sounds like you want to do that, you're not able to. And I got to tell you, there are plenty of startups that basically provide scraping options that allow us to just go grab it. And that's sharing user IDs and passwords with customers, which is way more insecure than providing the security.
I will say one of our venture arm, Constellation Tech Ventures, looked at investing in one of those companies, and we were like, should, as a utility, invest in a company that can scrape utility data? That doesn't really feel right. I will say just quickly, not all of our utilities did Green Button because A, they didn't think that it actually provided value, which is debatable, but B, because the cost of implementation is pretty expensive. And so a couple of them have built out their own different types of systems in order to do something similar, but aren't exactly Green Button. Utilization rates for Green Button tend to be fairly low, though, for Green Button Connect. That's a problem to get customers to do that. I will say, though, the capitalization issue, some of our service territories can capitalize IT investments. We have, I don't know if Sadzi is in here, but she's one of the commissioners in Illinois. The Illinois Commission has been very favorable to us in rate-basing cloud infrastructure. So it's, can you push that further to do all IT systems? But rate-basing cloud infrastructure and rate-basing SaaS platforms is a game changer for what we're trying to do. And I think you're seeing commissions slowly move towards being able to do that.
Sometimes it's painful because, at least for us, you have to make it on a business case by business case basis, which maybe, I think it's entirely defensible from a regulatory standpoint. It just causes us to spend a lot of time trying to make that case. But you can do it. It's just not always fast or easy.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time. So please join me in thanking the panel for all of their insights.